Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfic. This will be the continuation of Swallow the Stars. This will be Part 19, Chapter 19, entitled Event Horizon. Izuku sits on the floor, cross-legged and pleasantly buzzing from his warm-up stretches and laps around the gym. Hizashi's in front of him in a similar pose, wearing his hero costume for the first time since they started training together in early May. Izuku's mind whirs at the implications of this change, understanding that it means Hizashi's going to be using his quirk but unsure in what capacity. Is Izuku meant to fight him, learn to dodge, control the impulse to lash out when under pressure? All the above seems most probable. So, my favorite listener, Hizashi says, leaning back on his hands and smiling at Izuku. Did you redo your analysis on Amahaki like I asked? Izuku nods quickly, excitement bubbling up in his chest. Yeah, I spent over an hour writing it out. His first analysis of Amahaki, written up when he had only just started living with Aizawa, had only taken up a 2-page spread, and it had been largely filled with questions and speculation. The one he just finished this week is 5 pages and incredibly detailed. He wants to know his quirk inside and out, and it seems like he's finally starting to. Hizashi laughs, light-hearted and clearly pleased. Tell me about it, specifically about what you learned in the past few months working with me. It's all about placement and timing, Izuku says, practically vibrating where he's sitting. Which is so cool, and I wish I would have thought of that myself. Since I can't control Amahaki's output of power, it's always dialed up to 100 when I let go. The only thing I can control is how long I hold it for and where I put it. Which... His hands unclasp from his lap as he starts to use them to gesture while he talks. Wasn't a new revelation at the time, because I had already learned that on the beach, even if it was subconscious. But I've been so focused on the destructive qualities of Amahaki that I got blinded to the fact that it's just gravity, and gravity is useful and has more qualities than just crushing things. Izuku hardly spares the time it takes to breathe. But when you said to use it to move items around by pinpointing a location away from the object, everything just clicked. Because it's gravity. Of course there's going to be a draw-in effect and a warping effect in the air around it, but up to now I'd just been running on instinct and centering the gravity on the targets, which is why they always get crushed. On the first day of their lessons together, Hizashi had sat Izuku down and explained the concept of black holes to him. Izuku doesn't like science, but he does like stars and quirks, so he'd listened diligently to what Hizashi said. Black holes are just masses of gravity, so dense that they suck in their surroundings and neutralize them. There is both a draw-in effect and a crushing effect. Hizashi explained the concept of an event horizon, a point of no return for an object entering the black hole's gravitational field, and then... When Izuku still didn't understand, he explained it in the context of Amahaki's power. Hizashi had described the hole in the sand that Izuku had made his first day on the beach. Yes, the gravity had condensed everything in the quadrant and crushed it to nearly nothing, but the most interesting part had been the objects around the hole. They had all moved in toward the center. Amahaki is a black hole, Hizashi had said, eyes glinting, which means if you targeted an area away from an object or a person, there's going to be a draw-in effect on that object toward the power. Izuku, you can move things. From that point, their training had involved figuring out where exactly the event horizon was for Amahaki's power. It involved an insane amount of math and empty drink cans, but they eventually figured out that the distance between where the center of attack is and the event horizon is perfectly proportional to how large the epicenter is, which then logically led to the next stage, moving something on purpose. The amount of control Izuku has to put forth to both place the epicenter of his attack and produce a very specifically sized black hole leaves him shaking most days. But he has since succeeded on the task. So I was thinking while I was writing the analysis, Izuku continues, that if I can pinpoint and move objects, I should be able to stack together a line of black holes that can move a target a larger distance, right? If I can be fast enough with it to not crush the target, then all I have to do is place and release a chain of black holes. But aside from that, what else can be done with an event horizon? Black holes warp whatever goes into them, so in theory I should be able to also use a well-placed attack to just divert something. Exactly. Hizashi jumps to his feet, hands clapping together. I knew you'd figure it out. Izuku scrambles up, bouncing on his toes eagerly. Is that what we're doing today? Hizashi touches his fingertip to his nose. Bingo, he says in English. I'm going to shout my voice around the gym, not at you, don't worry, and you're going to try to redirect the sound waves. They spend the next few minutes walking the perimeter of the gym to set up targets before reconvening in the middle. Izuku takes off his right glove without being prompted, and he watches the black lines on his palm sizzle into red. Amahaki surges inside of him, unwinding from between his ribs like ribbons of smoke that snake their way along his arm and up his shoulder. It's impossible to not feel powerful with all that barely restrained mass and energy sliding along his muscles and reinforcing his bones. Ready? Izuku looks up at his dad, who is relaxed and smiling at him like this is a normal day. Like Izuku's just a normal kid with a normal quirk and not a test subject harnessing a god. He nods. Ready. Hizashi points to the target that he's going to be aiming at. There's no point in trying to make Izuku guess or predict attacks right now, not when they're working on building a foundation. Izuku raises his right arm, fingers loosely curled and twitching slightly at the movement of Amahaki under his skin, and chooses a location between where they're standing and where the target sits waiting. The moment Hizashi screams, Izuku curls his fingers inward and unleashes a drop of Amahaki's power. Darkness swirls at the edge of Izuku's vision, smoky and void-like, and he can just barely make out the distortion effect of the black hole he places above the floor, but Hizashi's voice attack still hits the target. Shit. Izuku pulls his power back in with the feeling of dipping his fingers through cold sand. Amahaki pulses and pushes and weighs heavily on Izuku's shoulder, and the mark in his palm grows into a jagged curling pattern up his forearm. Your aim was good, Hizashi praises with a thumbs up. Yeah, but Izuku already knew it would be going into this exercise. He'd been practicing his aim for over a year now. First with the trash on the beach, and lately on points in the air, just close enough to targets to move them. He knows how to place these miniature black holes where he wants them. The problem is just that I'm too slow. He blows out a breath and shakes out his arm. The tingling static under his skin that's like pins and needles is still something he's not used to. He doubts he'll ever be used to it. At least he can tune out the static in his head. All right, he says, raising his arm again. He'll just have to be faster. Then a new goal. A new thing to surpass. He can do this. Again. They practice for over an hour. Hizashi throws his voice, Izuku throws out a black hole, and every time he misses, frustration builds like a bitter weight in Izuku's chest, mingling with Amahaki's mass and movement until Izuku is shaking. He can't tell anymore if it's exhaustion that's making his movements shorter and his breath faster, or if it's the roiling mass of gravity and distaste pushing against his lungs. Hizashi stops them before he can find out. That's enough for today, he says, making an obvious showing of moving his hand before settling it on Izuku's shoulder and squeezing. Put your glove on before you catch frostbite or something. I'll take the targets down. Wordlessly, Izuku does as he's told and slips the leather over his hand. As soon as the palm is covered, the marks on his arm dissolve into static and fade away against his skin. Amahaki settles along his sternum, draped and clinging like moss from a tree. Clicking his tongue against his teeth in frustration, Izuku paces away from the center of the gym and goes to find his water bottle near the door. No matter how long he's been training, he's still not used to the feeling left behind when he can't at least see results at the end of a lesson. It sucks to know that he can put in so much effort, push himself until he's shaking, and have nothing to show for it. You all right, little listener? Izuku startles, having completely missed Hizashi's approach, tangled in his thoughts as he's been. Yeah, well, no, just frustrated, I guess. That's putting it mildly, but at least it's not a lie. Hizashi hums and picks up his water bottle before leaning his shoulder against the door. Somehow, I don't think telling you about my struggles when I was a kid would help you see reason, he says after a moment of silence. He's not smiling, face affected with a seriousness that's usually reserved for quiet discussions with Aizawa when Izuku's out of earshot. Because, as much as we're pretending here, you and I, and Shota, and Shinso now too, know that what you're working with isn't a quirk. And no amount of it's your power, so you'll definitely be able to control it, is going to stick in your brain, because it's not your power, yeah? It's in you. It's, in a sense, part of you, but it's not you. Izuku stares at his feet and fights against the urge to clench his fists. He taps his fingertips against his thumb instead and tries not to crush the water bottle in his left hand. This is exactly the problem. His control over Amahaki has gotten really good lately. 2 years ago, he couldn't control it at all. Could hardly keep even one palm uncovered without immediately destroying something, but it's not his power. He's fucking quirkless, so of course, there's a disconnect when he tries to use Amahaki, no matter how good his ideas are, no matter that Amahaki is willing to go along with his wants and his directions. They're not the same being. Izuku's a boy born without a quirk, and who was raised by people who chose him specifically for that. Amahaki is a god that was captured and torn to pieces, a god that only resides in Izuku's body because of a contract it willingly carved into Izuku's ribcage. But, Hizashi continues, even people who are born with quirks, powerful or not, struggle to find their control. That's why they practice. Hell, that's half the reason why places like UA exist. Sure, it's a hero school, so its ultimate goal is to train the next generation of heroes, but what do you think the majority of the practical lessons are? He leans forward, and now he's smiling again, soft and sincere. Quirk practice. Just about a quarter of the students admitted to UA each year have a destructive quirk that is not only hard to control, but also hurts them. It's my job, and Shota's, and Amuri's, and every other teacher's to teach those kids how to keep themselves and other people from getting hurt, which means training them how to aim, how to control, how to minimize damage, and you, little listener, can already do all of those things. Do you know what these lessons between you and me are really for? Izuku shakes his head, looking at Hisashi only out of the corner of his eye. They're for ideas. Hisashi spreads his arm and stands to his full height. A lack of creative thinking in the field can get you killed, Izuku. Having a powerful quirk is amazing and puts you head and shoulders above a lot of people, but knowing how to use that quirk will keep you safe. You hadn't even thought about the implications of carrying around a black hole inside of you until we started this lesson, and then, on your own in the last week, you thought of a new way to take advantage of just one aspect of Amahaki. That's the point, Izuku. It's not about being good right away. It's about opening up your mind to different ideas so that you don't stagnate and freeze up when your one-shot move doesn't work in the field. Izuku hasn't cried in weeks, but he feels tears welling up now, tightening his throat and burning the backs of his eyes. I just don't want you to think I'm not being serious, he says, fighting through the wall of emotions just to talk without hiccuping or stuttering. I don't want to let you down. Whoa, hey. Hisashi steps forward before crouching down and holding out his arms. No, none of that. Come here, Izuku. Tears drop from Izuku's eyes and stream down his cheeks, but he stumbles a few steps forward and collapses into his dad's chest. Strong arms immediately wrap around him. Izuku, I would never think that, okay? I know just how seriously you take all of this, and I'm not ever going to think otherwise. Hisashi cups the back of Izuku's head, and Izuku has to shove away the sob that builds in his chest. You're not letting me down. Promise. There's nothing that you could do that would make me disappointed in you. You have such a big heart, Izuku. Try to keep your head from getting in the way of it, okay? He presses a kiss to Izuku's temple and then just holds him close, and Izuku cries silent tears into Hisashi's shoulder until he has no more to spare. It feels like an eternity has passed before Izuku leans away, scrubbing the heels of his hands against his eyes and cheeks to get rid of the remains of his tears. Sorry. He clears his throat and grimaces before taking a drink of water. Nothing to apologize for, Hisashi assures, ruffling Izuku's hair before straightening up. Feeling better? A little. Izuku shrugs, but at least he can meet Hisashi's gaze again. Hisashi smiles at him in a way that makes Izuku feel like he's being hugged still, held safely in his dad's arms. I'm glad. Now let's get home. I still have ramen to make, and I want to annoy Shinso about his English grades before you two hide in your room to gossip the night away. Izuku splutters, unable to hide the blush that spreads over his cheeks. We don't gossip, we do homework. Aha! So you do gossip. Hisashi slings his arm over Izuku's shoulder, and he starts to lead him from the gym and across the school grounds. What do you gossip about? Please tell me it's about Shota. Anyway, Izuku says far too loudly, desperate to steer the conversation in a different direction. Tell me about your time at UA. His dad does not need to know what he and Hitoshi talk about during the evenings after training and dinner. It's not even anything embarrassing, not in Izuku's opinion. It's just that what he and Hitoshi talk about feels special. Not fragile, just precious, like it's just for them, even though the topics range from summer vacation plans to dreams of working together as pros. They're tangled together with how close Izuku and Hitoshi are when they talk. They do get their homework done, but afterwards they'll lay on the floor and hold hands, or Izuku will lean against his bedpost and Hitoshi will put his head in his lap and talk and gesture with his hands while Izuku runs his fingers through his hair. And despite the futon rolled up in Izuku's closet, they haven't used it since the kidnapping. When Hitoshi spends the night, they share Izuku's bed. Thankfully, Hisashi takes the topic change in stride and starts animatedly regaling his high school years. Starting with meeting Aizawa, the conversation quickly steers into stories of mischief that Hisashi and Aizawa got up to in their days at UA, and Izuku is an active listener all the way home. They're the first ones back, which isn't unusual, so they split off like they normally do, with Hisashi going to the kitchen to start on dinner, and Izuku heading into the bathroom for a shower. By the time Aizawa and Hitoshi stumble into the apartment, Izuku seated at the kitchen table with Leo happily purring in his lap, and Hisashi sat across from him holding a cup of tea. Welcome home, Izuku calls, just as loud as he always does. Both Aizawa and Hitoshi shoot him a glare at the volume, which just makes Izuku laugh. You two look related when you do that. You're one to talk, Hitoshi says as he takes off his shoes. Every little micro-expression you make is just a replication of his. He jerks his thumb over his shoulder to indicate Aizawa. I call dibs on the shower, he says, and Aizawa just grunts in response and lifts Coco off the floor so she can perch on his shoulder. By the time dinner is done and cleaned up, Izuku has given up on helping even with the food preparation, so he just does the dishes afterwards. Izuku feels exhaustion weighing him down from his shoulders, It's not unreasonably late, and there's still homework to do, but all he wants to do is sleep. I'm taking your son hostage, Hitoshi says, hauling Izuku away from the counter with an arm around his back. No funny business, or the kid gets it. Both Aizawa and Hisashi hold up their hands in a peaceful gesture. Izuku rolls his eyes and gently elbows Hitoshi in the ribs. Oi, no struggling. Hitoshi digs his knuckles into Izuku's head and drags him off to Izuku's room. Izuku isn't released even once the door closes. Why are you holding me hostage? He asked, not really minding at all. It's Hitoshi. Izuku wouldn't mind anything that he did. Because you're stressed, and if I don't force you to relax, you won't. Hitoshi releases Izuku only when he sits down on the bed, but he grabs Izuku by the front of his shirt to make sure he follows. Come on. You're going to put your head in my lap and tell me what's on your mind, and I'm going to tell you if you're being stupid or not. Izuku huffs through his nose and rolls his eyes. Okay, so maybe he does act like Aizawa a lot, but that's not his fault. But he does as Hitoshi says. He lays on his back, hands resting on his stomach, head pillowed on Hitoshi's thigh, and turns his head to stare across the room. Hung up on the center of the wall, across him, is the painting that Hitoshi had given him for Christmas. Dark reds and blues and a purple so close to black that it may as well swirl around in hard lines and make up a visage of how Hitoshi had seen Amahaki the day that they were kidnapped. Izuku had cried when he saw the painting the first time, overwhelmed both by Hitoshi's talent and the way that he made the ugliest part of Izuku look beautiful. After a moment of silence, Hitoshi pushes his fingers through Izuku's hair. It's still in the same style Maki cut it into a year ago, but it's longer on top now, and it feels, admittedly, great to have Hitoshi playing with it. It does take him a moment to work out what he wants to say and how he wants to say it, though. I just feel like I'm failing, you know, like... He gestures his hand up to the air before letting it fall back to his stomach. Training has always been hard, grueling even. Aizawa's not exactly a gentle teacher. He's definitely not. Hitoshi agrees with a wince, his free hand moving to his side, likely covering a new bruise. Right? But I don't know. Physical training was always something I knew I could improve with. It's just practice and repetition until your body gets used to moving how you need it to. He risks a glance away from the ceiling to watch Hitoshi more closely and finds him already watching Izuku in kind. Instead of being embarrassed by the attention, Izuku relaxes into it. But I guess with Amahaki, it's different. Hitoshi doesn't say anything for a moment, but he gets this look on his face, one eyebrow tilting up near the center, eyes narrowing a fraction, mouth twisting off to the side. It means he's thinking about speaking, so Izuku waits. How is it different? He eventually asks. You've improved your control over it, a lot, even since I met you. He has fingernails gently scratching against Izuku's scalp in lazy circles, and he blinks slowly down at him like a sleepy cat. It's really hard to be frustrated when Hitoshi's doing that. Hell, it's hard to even think. It doesn't feel like I'm actually getting anywhere, I guess, is what he manages to say. Of course it doesn't, Hitoshi says. You analyze quirks all the time. You analyzed Amahaki recently too, right? So of course it doesn't feel like you're making any progress if you just stripped down your quirk and thought of a million new applications for it. In your head, you think you should already be there, but theory and reality are different. Izuku takes a moment to let Hitoshi's words sink in, to mull them over in his head. What he's saying makes sense, even if it doesn't make Izuku feel all that much better. How about you? He asked, changing the topic for a moment. You're still working with the capture weapon, right? Hitoshi shakes his head. Aizawa-san wanted me to take a break from that tonight. It's a bitch and a half to learn, which is so stupid because Aizawa-san makes it look fucking easy, but getting it to turn how I want it in the air is... He scrunches up his face. He's been using it for like a decade. Obviously he's better than you are. You know how hypocritical you sound right now, right? Hitoshi flicks Izuku in the nose, causing Izuku to yelp and twist his face away. He rubs his nose, glaring at Hitoshi, who easily ignores him. We worked on the quarterstaff tonight. Being quick with it is hard. Izuku hums, and he reaches out to find Hitoshi's free hand on the bed so he can bring it up to his chest and link their fingers together. That's what I'm struggling with right now, too. Speed. Well, reaction time, really. Speed has never been his thing. He's too heavy for it. With Amahaki inside of him, Izuku weighs far more than a kid his size should. He's half convinced that all that extra weight has kept him from growing taller, too, but without knowing his biological parents, he can't really rule out genetics. Regardless, he's not quick, and even pulling Amahaki to the surface for an attack has a wind-up time. Oh! Izuku's eyes go wide as an idea smacks into him. What? Hitoshi arches a single brow, curious and interested. Figure something out. Izuku moves to take off his right glove. I want to test this right now. Absolutely not, dumbass. Hitoshi quickly covers Izuku's hand with his own, effectively pinning his glove in place. You're exhausted. Whatever you thought of can wait until tomorrow. Right. Right, rationality over impulsivity. Damn. Fine. He sighs, relaxing his hands. Some part of him is pleased when Hitoshi doesn't remove his own. Tell me about it. No longer faced with Izuku's recklessness, Hitoshi goes back to carefully combing through his hair. I'm not fast, Izuku starts, despite the fact that Hitoshi never minds it when Izuku's mind goes too fast for words. When he starts talking in the middle of a thought or changes the direction of a sentence halfway through or stops before he can get to his point, he wants to make sure he's understood this time. And neither is Amahaki. It's too big, too much. When I try to pull its power up to use it, there's a delay. Probably because it's not actually my power. I mean, it's inside of me, and I know it can't leave, and I can use the power, obviously, but it's really just like I'm asking for it, and it's being handed off to me instead of me just pulling it from somewhere inside of me, and oops, I'm rambling again. Anyways, so there's a delay, which isn't something I actually notice while using it. The delay isn't that obvious, and the sheer amount of power tends to make up for it, but it's there, probably because the majority of my training has been keeping that power at bay, which is fair, and I'm not complaining. It's just really nice to not explode when my gloves are off, but I think that it's maybe become too ingrained to just hold the power back, and I think I need to adjust where I'm holding it. Hitoshi tilts his head a fraction to the side. Cute. His thumb slides over Izuku's knuckles along the line of his gloves. What do you mean by that? Where you're holding it? With Hitoshi's hand still over top of his, Izuku moves his hands down to his ribcage and finds roughly where Amahaki is curled up. I can feel it sitting inside of me. I'm sure it occupies the majority of my body, but there's always this concentrated part of it that moves around and stuff. It's weird. Feels strange. His nose scrunches up. When I'm holding in its power, I usually focus on keeping it centered around my core since it seems to discharge from the marks in my palms. I figured the further away from my palms it was, the less likely for it to just go off, but I'm thinking, maybe if I try to keep the power in my palms, focus on holding it there and then restraining it, your reaction time will be faster. Izuku nods, his eyes lighting up. Exactly. I think I can do it. I know what its power feels like, so stopping it just under the surface shouldn't be too hard. That'll probably expend more energy, but long drawn-out fights really aren't something that I'm aiming for anyway. Hitoshi nods. Aizawa-san always kicks my ass in under 3 minutes. You do too. That's the average time of a fight, Izuku says, repeating something Aizawa had drilled into his head when he first started training. The whole point is to make the fight end as soon as possible, so in most situations, exhaustion won't be an issue for me anyway. He makes a fist out of his left hand. I think I can do this. The smile Hitoshi gives Izuku is small and fond, and Izuku's heart blooms under it. God, Hitoshi is handsome, and kind, and funny and supportive, and just so nice to be around. Izuku doesn't know very much about love, and he doesn't know anything about romance, but he knows he loves Hitoshi. He extricates his hand from under Hitoshi's and reaches up to tug on the pendants that's tucked away under his shirt. Have I mentioned lately how much I like you? He asks with his own smile in place. I'm so glad I met you. Hitoshi blushes and then scowls from it, reaching over to shove Izuku's face away with his hand. Too bright, Nightlight. Izuku laughs full of delight. Maybe that should be my hero name, he teases, not at all trying to shake Hitoshi's hand from where it rests over his cheek and part of his mouth. I'll be Nightlight, and you can be, Lava Lamp, maybe. Your hair would make the name work. Okay, that's it. Hitoshi shifts his legs from under Izuku's head, and in the same motion grabs his arms and pins them to the bed. Izuku can't stop laughing, even as he watches Hitoshi lean over him with a glare. Punishment for the hair comment. A minute of tickling. No fair! Izuku hadn't known he was ticklish until Hitoshi decided upon a similar punishment for him, for a slight that he can't even remember anymore. But it turns out he's really ticklish, and that's not even fair, because now Hitoshi exploits it whenever he wants. And sure, Izuku could use his weight and grappling skills to throw Hitoshi off of him, but where's the fun in that? It's much more fun to slip his wrist from Hitoshi's hand, knock the insides of Hitoshi's elbows, and catch him by the shoulders, mere centimeters before their faces would have crashed into each other. Hitoshi blushes fiercely, and Izuku feels his own blush spreading across his cheeks. Neither of them moves, even when Hitoshi settles his elbows on the bed and supports his own weight. They just lay there, breathing the same air, with Hitoshi's hair, long and loose from its typical gelled style after his shower, framing their faces. Is this... Izuku doesn't even know what he was about to ask, the words evaporating from his mind the moment that he catches the way Hitoshi's eyes flick down to his mouth and then back up lightning fast. His heart jackrabbits behind his ribs, so loud he's sure Hitoshi can hear it. Sorry, Can I kiss you? Hitoshi whispers, his breath is warm against Izuku's lips. Oh. Yes. Hitoshi leans down slowly, hesitates for half a second, and then presses his lips against Izuku's. It's soft and chaste and tender, in a way that aches. And everything suddenly just makes sense. The need to buy Hitoshi those pendants, specifically the one with the green gem, to match his own with the purple. The way that he doesn't need Hitoshi to broadcast his movements before touching him because Hitoshi has already figured out which sorts of touch Izuku's always comfortable with and which ones might send him into a panic. The way Izuku likes to hold Hitoshi when they sleep, spooned up behind him or with Hitoshi's head pillowed on his shoulder. This is what's been missing. An admittance between the two of them, the give of some ground, the vulnerability to admit feelings and move to something further than just friendship. Hitoshi leans back, and Izuku immediately chases after him. His smile makes kissing a little more difficult, but he doesn't really care because Hitoshi sighs against his mouth, a happy sound that shivers all the way down Izuku's spine, and pushes into the kiss. Izuku moves his hands up to Hitoshi's shoulders, just wanting to hold and touch. His fingers find the chain of Hitoshi's necklace and play with it while the other hand moves into Hitoshi's hair. This time, when Hitoshi moves away, he does so with a kiss to the corner of Izuku's mouth before laying down on Izuku's chest. Been wanting to do that for like a year, he admits, voice still quiet. Izuku doesn't know how to respond, so he just keeps playing with Hitoshi's hair and twirling the silver necklace chain around his fingers. Does this change anything between us? It doesn't have to, Izuku says. I would like to do that again, though. A lot. With a groan, Hitoshi turns his face into Izuku's chest. It's so easy to picture his blush that Izuku laughs again. No matter what happens in the future, Izuku knows that he will always get to keep this, because Hitoshi has already seen the worst parts of Izuku, and he thought them beautiful, and chose to stay. All right, everyone. This concludes Chapter 19 of Swallow the Stars. Chapter 20 will be next. I hope you all are still enjoying this fic, and as always, thank you so much for listening.